Okay, welcome everybody to Discover Bordeaux. My name is Lydia Harrison. I'm a Master of Wine as of 2019, and I'm a full-time educator at the WST School in London, where I teach lots of different levels, but particularly at our diploma level 4, I will teach Bordeaux, as it's a real passion of mine. It's one of the first things I tried that really got me into wine when I was younger. It's also the region, the wine region I've visited the most. Over a dozen times. I've kind of lost count over the years. But since I began working in wine, I used to go to Vinopolis, not Vinopolis, Vinexpo, sorry, a really big fair that kind of the equivalent of Provine back in the day. Huge wine fair in Bordeaux that they used to host biannually. I've been to that many times. I've visited lots of different producers over the years, lots of different trips, and some with my MW studies as well. And so I love the region. I love the place, and I'm also a Bordeaux certified educator for the CIVB. So I've been twice with them to do their course at the École du Vin. You have to pass their test, and then you're accredited to teach about the wines of Bordeaux. And I just went last summer as well to do my reaccreditation. You go back every 4 years. So a lot of actually some of the facts and figures that I've included in the presentation tonight are courtesy of the CIVB. Most of it is the most up-to-date information I could find, bearing in mind that obviously we would have had another update usually around this time, and obviously that hasn't happened at the moment. They would normally come over to the UK and would go through the facts and figures. So some of it's from 2019, some might be 2018, but the most recent figures that I could find to kind of paint a picture of what's going on in the region. And they have some wonderful resources. You can just the website bordeaux.com, which I'll show again at the end, from the CIVB. So some great learning information covering all sorts of different things on Bordeaux there. Okay, let's get going. So just to obviously, first of all, let's find out where Bordeaux is, and you can see it here down in southwest France. So just so to highlight some of the other key regions that you look at, this is our level 3 map. And this is Bordeaux city here, and all of this blue area surrounding it is the appellation. Okay, so we've got a moderate climate here. We're a little bit further south in France, on the sort of 45th parallel in terms of latitude. And that's really important because that enables you to ripen the grape varieties that are key in Bordeaux that we'll look at. You're also influenced massively by obviously the Atlantic, Biscay here. It does rain during the summer. It's very much like the UK, and that can give you issues with mildew and rot in the vineyards. But like anywhere as well, the weather from year to year can be different. Some years are very dry. Sometimes they'll have heat spikes. But you also have this long summer. And again, that's really important. They've got late ripening grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon that you can then leave the grapes on the vine and maybe not even pick until late September, October, which you can't do in more inland, more continental climates. So the location is really crucial for the varieties that are grown and the styles of wine that are produced. So just to highlight that. Usually they avoid frost here because you are, further south, it is warmer, but there are every so often, every sort of few decades, these freak vintages where frost can be really devastating, like in 2017, which a lot of vineyards were devastated by that. So, like anywhere, it's not always, the stable summer conditions from year to year. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit, let me just move my video out of the way, about the history. Obviously, there's lots you could go on for ages, but I've just sort of highlighted some of the key things. And I always like to mention this, that actually Bordeaux was considered British, under British rule, for nearly 300 years. So it's always an interesting point. That was with the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine to Henry Plantagenet in 1152, and so actually then that area, Aquitaine, became under British rule, under the king. And there was obviously long-standing history of trade, of wines and other things between Bordeaux and Britain. 15th century, unfortunately, the Aquitaine was recaptured by the French. We were at war with the French. And then obviously you have a lot of the importance of Holland and the Hanseatic cities and Brittany for a lot of the main markets. And it was the Dutch that were responsible for draining a lot of the vineyard area in the Medoc, particularly, that was marshland, and making it therefore viable for viticulture. And that forms a lot of the Medoc, the Medoc region that we see today. So that was really crucial for enabling a lot more vines to be planted on the land. Then you've got sort of Atlantic trade and exports becoming more important. And then it was really the 19th century that you really started to see lots of investments in the region. Okay, so, winemaking, technology, focusing on quality, the 1855 exhibition, all of these sorts of things started really going at a pace. And then obviously in the 20th century, you've had the foundation of the INAO, which is obviously supports all your origins and appellation controle in France. You had in 1948 the foundation of the CIVB, which is who I'm an accredited tutor for, who represent the whole of the Bordeaux region. And then in 1989, you had the Bordeaux Wine School, or as it's called in French, the École du Vin, which is in Bordeaux City. They have a wonderful bar. Actually, you can go and taste loads of different wines there. It's great if you visit. But they also have a school, and they do lots of courses for educators, for all sorts of people around the world, global, whether sometimes it's trade focused like sommeliers, sometimes on educators, and different courses to, teach people about Bordeaux and spread the love. And then another kind of key point, 1990s, this was Professor de Bourdieu discovered the molecules, the actual aroma compounds responsible for that characteristic aroma of Sauvignon Blanc, and those sort of boxwood and characteristics that you get. So, I mean, that's just a snapshot of some of the highlights, but, Bordeaux, the history is long-standing, and also just, it's far-reaching, from whether it's sort of in a professional capacity, research, to investment in winemaking, to the sales. We'll look at the place and negociants later, to education. So every sort of sphere of the wine trade and the wine world can be seen in Bordeaux. All right, now let's have a look a little bit more at today. And I know those eager-eyed of you will see the figure here, 111,000 hectares, is slightly less than here. The diagram is a little bit older. This is the latest figure, so the vineyard size has decreased fractionally. But I wanted to still include the diagram just to kind of show you how big the Bordeaux wine region is in comparison to the other, famous regions of France. So you're looking at over 110,000 hectares. I mean, the Rhone is about 70,000. So, and there's a lot of production in your Côte d'Or. So just kind of brings it into context a little bit. Burgundy, Bourgogne, only 26,000 hectares in comparison. So Bordeaux is an absolute powerhouse. It's the largest appellation, so quality wine region in France. All of Bordeaux and its wines are considered PDO quality, which is protected designation of origin. Okay, and that's just it's so important for France as a country, not just in wine terms, employment, jobs, the whole infrastructure around it, tourism, the city itself. So it's really important in all aspects of wine and the economy for France. So just really there for you to see, the scale of Bordeaux. It still looks small, obviously, when you compare it to the whole of the world's vineyard, but we are talking about around 5 million hectolitres of wine. Obviously that can go up and down, and I've got a chart later that looks at some of the vintages, but this is a huge volume of wine to sell. And we're looking at all different qualities, all different price points, styles, everything. So some figures there about, the CIVB have a huge job to try and represent all these different states, different cooperatives, merchants. They're really representing a huge and diverse and complex wine region. There's 65 different appellations. So these are what you would see on a label, okay? If you see just Bordeaux, appellation Bordeaux Contrôlé, that's a little bit more self-explanatory. People have heard of the city, Bordeaux Supérieur. That's the regional. But then obviously as you go into it, there's more precise regions like Saint-Emilion, Haut-Médoc, Margaux, etc. So there's 65 different appellations. So again, you know, lots of different labeling terms for people to know and understand that these wines are all from the Bordeaux region and all using the signature grapes that we'll look at. The average property size, and this has increased over the last few years. So, you know, people are consolidating, and, you know, often producers might have quite a few, you know, own different properties in different parts of Bordeaux, but that's the average. Obviously there are smaller properties than that, there are substantially bigger, but that's the average. So again, you know, compared to other vineyard regions where the average holding is a lot smaller in size. And 5% is the classified gross. So if you like your top estates, that we'll talk about some of those famous names like L'Herve Barton that already came up tonight, your Chateau Margaux, Felles-Senguer, this is only 5% of the vineyard area. So it's important to remember that Bordeaux is a really huge and diverse category. A lot of the, you know, the really famous expensive wines get a lot of airplay, or the ones that people know. But really there's so much in the region and lots of different people and lots of different wine styles being produced. And then just to show you the kind of split. So a lot of Bordeaux is still very important in the domestic market, but exports have slowly been increasing as well. And roughly about 44% is exported by volume. And there you go, I like that fact. 18 bottles of Bordeaux are sold every second and worldwide. So, you know, just I love that, thinking someone else out there is also buying a bottle and drinking it the same time as I am. Okay. And then just, yeah, a little bit, I don't want to, you know, death by figures or PowerPoint, but just in case for those that are interested, the top markets, which are the same actually for value and volume, but just to give you a little bit of idea about the scale, you know, of the trade here. This is significant in terms of value and volume. And obviously you have some markets where they will focus more on some of the cheaper wines. Sometimes Germany perhaps is more on sort of the volume end. There's markets like Hong Kong, which are very much in the sort of high end fine wine investments, and then the UK, which is a bit of everything. So just so you can see a little bit of an idea there, 573 million euros. That's Hong Kong and China and Macau actually all combined. So this is, you know, we're talking about a really big and important wine region. Okay, this is a map, also credit from the CIVB. It's a bit more detailed than some of the ones we show at the WSET, because you can't just physically, we can't tell you about every single region. But what I really like about this is it shows you all of the appellations. I'm not expecting you to remember them all, but you can have a little look and hopefully see some of your favorites or some of those names that you might recognize. So for example, if we say Margaux is quite famous here in the Médoc, you've got Sauternes for your sweet wine down here. Saint-Emilion, probably one of the better known ACs over on the right bank. But what it also does is color code them. So you can see the ones here with the sort of red purple dots. These are appellations only for red wines. Okay, so even if you're making a white wine over here and you're situated in Pauillac, you can only call that Bordeaux Blanc. Okay, or appellation Bordeaux Contrôlé. So, you know, there's some complexities about what you will see on the label. Here with the sort of more orangey coloured, you can see these are sweet wine appellations only, okay? Blanc du, sweet wine. So Sèvres, Barsac, Sauternes, if you see these labels on your bottle of wine, they have to be sweet white wines. Others can be a little bit more diverse. For example, some of these lesser known ones like Grave de Vay, you can make red wines, sweet wines, and white wines in these appellations. Okay, so I like this map because it really, you know, spells it out to what kind of wine styles are permitted to use with the different labeling terms. The Entre deux Mers, for example, you can see this huge region here known as Between the Two Seas because it sits between the two rivers. That's what Entre deux Mers means, is only for white wines. So if you're making red wine in this vast area, that will just be your basic Bordeaux Rouge. Nothing more on the label than Appellation Bordeaux AC, okay, Appellation Bordeaux Contrôlé. So if you do see these more specific places, they are telling you exactly where your wine is coming from in Bordeaux, and that can relate to a specific style. You've obviously got some pink wines as well, so your rosés that we'll talk about. But just wanted to show you that obviously you can study it a little bit more in your own time. But it just shows you, I think, a snapshot of the diversity of the wine styles, the number of appellations, and what is going on in this amazing region. All right, and then just to highlight, because I can't touch on every single appellation, obviously, but just to show, there has been some regression and some what I would call modernization. So because there were so many different appellations, what they actually did, the Côte group, was combine them. So whereas previously it was Côte de Blaye and Côte de Cadillac and Côte de Castillon, these were all separate, and people, perhaps didn't understand exactly where these wines were located or that they were even in Bordeaux. They have actually joined forces. So now they use the term Côte de Bordeaux as a collective, these 5 areas that are all on the right bank around Saint-Emilion. If I just click back, you can see them all. So you've got Blaye up here in the north, you've got Castillon here, if you can see, just to the east of Saint-Emilion, Pomerol. Okay, so all on the right bank here, all Merlot driven styles, and we'll talk about the blends in a little while, but just to show you that there has been some change in the appellations. They now all can collectively use the term Côte de Bordeaux and still obviously use their name separately, but I think it's a really good marketing thing. They can share resources, they can put that as a collective name, and these are often really good value wines, better than your basic Bordeaux regional appellations, and areas where people are experimenting, younger generations are setting up because it's a little bit more affordable. So there's some really interesting wines to look at in the Côte. So just an example there of some of the changes that have actually occurred as well. All right, now to look obviously at the grape varieties. We've talked a little bit about the history and some of the key regions, but Bordeaux usually is all about the blend. Okay, you're mixing grape varieties, and this is really beneficial because the grape varieties do things at different times. They'll ripen at different points. They give you different flavors, different structure. So it's usually seen here that the sum is greater than the parts, and by using more than one variety, you can really make the best wine potentially available to you. But Merlot is still dominant. You can see that 66% of the black grapes is Merlot. So this really is dominant. This is going to be very important in your more entry-level wine styles. So your Bordeaux AC, your regional level wines, or Bordeaux Supérieur. And then obviously in those famous wines of the right bank, your Saint-Emilion, your Pomerol, this is where Merlot really comes into its own and will be the dominant partner in the blend. Okay, so some of these wines on the right bank might be 70, 80% Merlot. Okay. Then obviously you have Cabernet Sauvignon. I won't go into too much detail about all these grapes. I did a separate seminar on Cabernet Sauvignon if you want to delve into the characteristics of that variety. But this is your real late ripener, thick skinned. So it gives lots of black fruits aroma, high tannins and acids, so much more structured than Merlot. This is 22%, and this will be more dominant on some of those left bank communes. So in the Médoc, in places like Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Pessac-Léognan, etc. And Cabernet Franc, okay, so like a kind of little brother to Cabernet Sauvignon, also some of those characteristics which can be blended in with both Cabernet and Merlot. But again, particularly on the right bank in Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, this is the grape that will provide the structure and the blending opportunities. Merlot I didn't talk about. This is usually a little bit rounded, which is why it can just be by itself for your more basic wines, early ripening, a little bit softer, quite medium acid and tannin. But equally, obviously, you can get amazingly concentrated and complex wines as well. And this is the stuffing, really. It gives more alcohol and body to the wines, more sort of plum fruit character, red and black fruit. That's Merlot. And then just only a small percent, but something that, it can be really important, just having a little bit of these varieties in the mix, in the blend, can just add some other characteristics. You've got Petit Verdot. It likes the warmth, so it only tends to ripen in the hotter years. But as global warming is happening, as the vineyards are on average getting warmer year on year, this is starting to be planted a little bit more. It's a late ripener. It will give tannin and acid structure to the wines. Malbec as well. Okay, obviously you're not too far from Cahors in Bordeaux, which is the French region for Malbec, and there are some vineyards that still have a little portion of Malbec in there, and Carmenère as well. So all of these, liking the warmer conditions, will be planted on the warmer soils, and adding a little bit of structure and colour to your wines. And then you can see the makeup of the whites is a lot more even here between Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. And some wines, especially some of the kind of fresh, dry white wines, will be more based on Sauvignon Blanc, especially for youthful drinking, because everyone loves that really fruity type of white wine, aromatics, that floral, green fruit, citrus fruit, etc. Semillon is much more important for the sweet wines of the region. It's thin-skinned, it's susceptible to botrytis, the rot that will shrivel up your grapes and raisin them, so you have lots of concentrated sugar and make them into sweet wines. But it also will provide an important part of some of your dry whites as well, and Semillon gives body and texture to the wines. And then you've got a little bit of muscadel, which is an aromatic white grape, it's quite floral and grapey, you can add a little bit of perfume. And then a few, bits and bobs that they're still permitted as well. So that is the main grape varieties, but I will touch on later as well a few that are hopefully also going to be authorized. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the wine styles, and this is one of the reasons why I love Bordeaux is you just have everything within one region. You could start your meal with a glass of Crémant, nice sparkling wine. You could then have some rosé. You could then have a dry white, different styles. You could have all the different reds you wanted. Obviously, I'd be with a group of friends, not drinking this much by myself. And then you can finish on some of the world-class dessert wines. So you've just got an amazing stylistic diversity. The bulk is red. It really is predominantly a red wine region. Now this has fallen a little bit, okay? You have seen an increase in rosé production in some whites and Crémant in the last few years. So red is now at 85% of the region, but again, coming in all different styles, from easy drinking, inexpensive styles to, amazingly complex and age-worthy reds. And you can see over half of that red production is still just your sort of more everyday regional level wines. So where you would just see Bordeaux or Bordeaux Superior on the label, coming from any of the vineyards, blended, some big brand production here, usually Merlot led, softer styled, easier drinking red wines. Okay, then you've got your more specific appellations, so the Medoc and the Grave on the left bank, which we might say the Medoc, or more specific appellations within that, such as Pauillac, Saint-Julien. Okay, so coming up to about 20%. You have the Côte, which we talked about, those sort of collaboration of areas on the right bank, your more Merlot led. And then you've got Saint-Emilion, Pommern and Fronsac, also on the right bank as well. And then you've got your rosé, so small in terms of obviously the whole production, but it is an area that is popular, and more people have been making rosés with the popularity of rosés, and this includes Bordeaux rosé, which is its own appellation, and also a category called claret, which is actually where they think the term claret comes from, which is what the British call red wine from Bordeaux. And this is a very deeply coloured rosé, which I love. It has real flavour and character. It's great with food. You don't see it as widely available in the UK because paler rosés are sometimes on trend, but if you do see it, I think it's really interesting. And it's a really sort of dark coloured rosé, so it almost looks like a pale red wine. And then you've got your dry whites, and we'll talk about some of the diversity of styles that you get there. Sweet wines, obviously, only a small percent, because you think, you're making wines from these tiny shriveled grapes. You're not going to have huge volumes, but still an important part of production. And Crémant as well, although it's only small, this is again something that sparkling wine is booming, and you can get Crémant, which is traditional method sparkling wines. They're made exactly the same way as champagne, but just coming from Bordeaux, so Crémant de Bordeaux. All right, and this is a picture of me having a tasting actually as part of my MW trip of the 2015s at Chateaubriand, we were trying Le Mission Aubriand and Aubriand, and we were trying their whites and reds. And I was just in my element at this moment. So it's a very, very happy picture for me. Okay, let me go back to some of the appellations. I haven't done quite as detailed a map because obviously it can be a bit overwhelming, but these are some of the key appellations that we talk about at level 3, and you know, some of the bigger in terms of volumes. And obviously I have to mention with Bordeaux, I've mentioned it a little bit already, but we talk about left bank and right bank. And that's because the left bank is basically all the vineyards here. So the Medoc, this purple region going down into Pessac-Léognan and Grave, that fall on the left-hand side of the Gironde estuary and the Garonne River, which goes in to join the Gironde estuary. And that's because of the soil, and soil is crucial in Bordeaux to determining which of the grape varieties you plant. Okay, and here you get a lot of gravel. This was the area, the Medoc, that I was saying the Dutch drained, so made it viable for viticulture, and you can still see some of those drainage channels in the Medoc. But you've got this lovely gravelly soil, so it heats up, it retains warmth, it drains the rain away, which does happen during the summer and during the ripening of your grapes. And so Cabernet Sauvignon will suit this more gravelly soil. So you get a lot more Cabernet Sauvignon planted here on the left bank in the Medoc and the Pessac-Léognan Grave region. Grave actually meaning gravel. And so the wines here will obviously tend to, not always dominated by, but will have a much higher proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend. So they tend to have more acid and tannin when you're tasting them, more black fruits, some of those herbaceous elements that we consider with Cabernet Sauvignon, that lovely green bell pepper character as well. Obviously, you can still blend in Merlot and Cabernet Franc and your bits of Malbec, etc. But that's why the location in Bordeaux is paramount, because the soil type you have will determine what grape varieties you have, and that will determine your blend and the style, the ultimate, taste and style of the wine. If you go over onto the right bank, so this is where the côtes are located that we talked about, Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, obviously some of the other areas, there's a lot more clay soil, clay and limestone. And clay is damper, limestone is white, it therefore reflects heat more, it's cooler, and is therefore suited more to your earlier ripening Merlot. And you will pick Merlot often, 2 weeks or so before Cabernet Sauvignon. So the wines coming from the right bank, which are dominated more by Merlot with maybe some Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc blended in to support, will usually be more bodied, usually about a degree more in alcohol, so % more if you're comparing the same vintages. Rounder, more plum fruit, more red fruit characters, so different in style. So even within the red wines, there really is a Bordeaux for everyone, because there's so many different styles available. And as I said before, the Entre Deux Mers is where a lot of, if you are growing Merlot and Cabernets here, this will be, if someone could please stop writing on my screen, thank you. That is where, I don't know how to click this off. There we go. That is where you will get a lot of the wine, just going into your Bordeaux, AC, reds, etc. So I'm focusing on red wines at the moment. I will come on to whites and sweets, but as we saw, 85% of your region is red. So that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. And I put a little fact here on the left just to show you, how important the rivers and the Gironde estuary is. This is 12 kilometers wide here at the mouth. It's a huge river. That obviously tempers the climate. It brings moisture, humidity. It's really important in the region, obviously, and allowing these grape varieties to ripen. And then obviously you've got the different styles. So I could spend all night just talking about the different appellations, but as an overview, obviously we talked about the Medoc and the Haut-Medoc. If you have these appellations on the label, these are more specific areas, so they'll have stricter rules for things like lower yields, better ripeness in your grapes, smaller quantities of grapes being produced from that vineyard. It should give you more concentration. Therefore, the wine can have more oak aging, more barrel aging, be more complex. And then if you go even smaller, these really precise appellations known as communes like Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux. This is like saying, if you're in London, you're saying, I'm particularly from Kentish Town, where I live, for example. Let's put it on the map. You're being much more precise about where your wine originates from, rather than saying just London, which is a vast area. And they, again, will have stricter rules and regulations. So, a lot of your top grapes coming from here, really quality focused production, lots of oak aging, and wines that are really, really age-worthy. The same down in Pessac Lyonnais and the Grave. And these are all Cabernet Sauvignon-led wines. And if it's not always dominant up in the upper reaches of the Medoc, obviously you are closer to the Atlantic, it is wetter, and Merlot can be more dominant. But especially as you start to come inland and go south, and where you have more gravel outcrops, you're going to find more Cabernet Sauvignon. And especially down in Pessac, again, a little bit further south, a little bit more sheltered inland, these wines can be a little bit riper than those up in the north. Okay, so even on the same banks, you're going to have variances from appellation to appellation and slight, microclimates. It is a large area, Bordeaux, so we can generalize about a particular vintage, but remember, even localized conditions might be different from up in the Medoc to down here to across over in Saint-Emilion. So don't always, just write off a vintage or think that all wines are great from one year, because you're going to have differences in the different areas. And also remember, white wines you're going to pick earlier than your black grapes that take longer to ripen. So what might not be a great year for your white wines would be really good for reds, or vice versa. Anyway, sidetracked a little bit there. And then if we go over to the right bank, obviously you're much more sort of Merlot-led wines. So Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, these wines are typically maybe 70-80% or so Merlot, with other obviously great varieties in the blend here as well. All right, just have a quick look on the chats. I can't keep up. I'm going to have to come to the questions at the end. If you could type them in again at the end, otherwise I just lose my train of thought. But yeah, so I highlighted some of the appellations there. And obviously, if you're really a big fan, you can get into the intricacies of the difference between the Saint-Estèphe versus a Margaux. Saint-Estèphe is known as the most kind of tannic, structured of the wines of the left bank. Margaux can be quite floral, a little bit more kind of perfumed in style. That's the beauty of Bordeaux. You can taste different areas, different producers, and just experiment with what you like. And yeah, I just wanted to, obviously we can't talk about every single vineyard or every single winery, but one of the key things in Bordeaux is it's relatively flat. Okay, it's a big area, but compared to some of the famous vineyard regions of the world, where you see these really steep slopes and amazing sort of vertical vineyards almost, Bordeaux is relatively flat. This is a picture I took at Château Smith-Lafitte in Pessac Lyonnais, a wonderful estate. And you can see the rows of vines. There are little undulations, a little bit more so in Saint-Emilion. In the Medoc, there's only a high point of about 40 meters above sea level. This is not huge. So what makes the difference here between your basic Bordeaux, your just sort of inexpensive, easy drinking styles, and some of your top, class gross or top wines? One thing is the soil. And then one thing is also density and yield from that. Okay, so you can see here how closely these vines are planted together. So they're competing for the resources. They're competing for the water in the soil, the nutrients, the warmth, the sunlight. And you would need to keep the yield, so the amount of grapes per vine, low in order to get sufficient ripeness in those grapes. So the lower the yield here, you're going to get better quality. Okay, and that's why it's so important. If you had high yield, the grapes would have less flavor concentration, be a little bit less ripe. That would be going into more of your sort of regional levels. So density of planting, soil type, yield, and what you do in the vineyard, canopy management, enabling the vine to ripen the fruit load that it has that year, making sure the grapes are healthy. All of these things become really, really important, because you haven't got a natural slope that will kind of easily just give you that ripeness or that warmth or that drainage. So it's a different kind of game here. And then obviously you've got the human input in the winemaking. So choosing fermentation temperature, all these sorts of decisions, what extraction you want to do to get the color and the tannins from the skins of your black grapes. This is a picture of the bowroom at Chateau Mouton Rothschild, which actually was released today. They just released their 2019 en primeur, so very timely. And you can see, I mean, so many new oak barrels here. So this is obviously in these top estates going to give lots of flavor and lots of complexity to the wines and soften the red wines as they age as well. So there's so many. I haven't got time to go into all the details of viticulture and winemaking, but just to highlight a few of the key things there in Bordeaux. And obviously, yes, with your better quality reds oak, the amount of time in oak is a key factor of the style. And then that obviously enables the development as well. So some time in oak and then also in bottle with a very slow oxidation. And one of the things I love about Bordeaux wines is their ability to age. And I've been fortunate enough to try some sort of older vintages. This was, as you can see, when I visited Chateau Smith-Lafitte, and they have almost a sort of museum room of vintages. You can go back a lot longer than that as well, and these wines are still alive. And the top producers, they evolve all this lovely tertiary complexity to things, aromas like cigar box, leather, cedar, tobacco. On the left bank, they still retain that element of herbaceousness, but it almost becomes sort of like dried blackcurrant leaves and green bell pepper. On the right bank, maybe with Merlot, more sort of chocolate, spices and dried fruits and prunes and raisins. So much complexity, but the best wines can really live for decades, and that's great. You've got the investments, you've also got you can buy wines, you can keep them, you can try them at different stages as well. And I love a really a good mature Bordeaux, and you don't have to wait decades as well. That's the beauty of it. You can have years that are sort of earlier maturing, where the grapes are a little less concentrated and really, really approachable in style as well. Just a little bit of another chart, but this was just to show you, obviously, you do have fluctuations year on year. This is some of the most recent vintages, and added in there the 2019 harvest. Unfortunately, usually the years that are really rated, so the vintages that everyone talks about, 2009, 2005, 2015, 2016, some great years, you can see are actually big in production as well. And that's because if you have good conditions, if it's drier, if it's sunnier, it's warmer, you've got better chances of ripening your fruit, less work to do. You can, the vine can ripen a slightly larger crop, still within the yield limits. And therefore, usually that's the benefit is you get quantity and quality. Some years where you can see there are bad conditions, like 2013, you have a smaller vintage. 2017, it's not a bad vintage in terms of flavor. It's just they had a lot of frost, which really wiped out some vineyards. And equally, I would say that people talk about great vintages and more favorable years, but these days, with the technology, with the work that you can do in the vineyards, I wouldn't say there's bad vintages. There's vintages that perhaps are underappreciated or seen as lesser or not as age-worthy, but can still provide great value for money and really enjoyable drinking. Some of the 2011s and 2012s that you can get in restaurants are drinking beautifully at the moment, softer styled, earlier maturing vintages. And then you've got the vintages like 2010, which is amazing vintage, which will be able to age 10, 20, 30 years, no problem. Okay. So just to show you, obviously it is, as well as having all the different areas, you've also got the different conditions year on year. And this is a very complex thing as well, supply and demand and differences in conditions and demand. 2019 was fairly good, sort of nearly at that sort of average of about 5 million hectolitres. Overall, production is going down slightly over the last decade or so, but yeah, around that kind of 5 million hectolitre mark. And I actually love some of the more classically styled Bordeaux vintage, things like 2014, 2008. Often when there's the hottest years, the summer years with really ripe fruits, then everyone really raves about the wines. But I actually sometimes like those years like 2014 that were sort of saved by what we call an Indian summer, the lovely September, October weather, and they still have lovely bright acid and freshness, and what I would see as a kind of classic Bordeaux vintage. So there really is something for everyone. If you like the, the warmer, riper styles, the more delicate styles, there's such diversity across the years, as well as the appellations and producers. Right, moving on, we obviously then, as well as all the regions and where you are, you have your classification system. So you often see two things on a label of Bordeaux, or three, or well, lots of different things, but the producer name, okay, whereabouts it's from. So on the label here, you've got Saint-Julien, one of my favorite appellations of the left bank, okay, so telling you that specifically from that tiny commune that was within the Haut-Médoc, if you remember. So we're talking about a Cabernet Sauvignon led wine here. But then you will also see, if it's in a region that has a classification system, and if it qualifies, a quality status, basically. So in the Médoc region, they have a couple of different ones, but the most long-standing was the 1855 classification. Okay, and that's like a private club. Okay, if you made it in 1855, you can still see these terms on the label, Grand Cru Classé or Cru Classé from 1855, and that means like a classed growth. So, it's like being your football club being in the top league. Okay, you're saying, yeah, this producer is great and they are in this club, and that one hasn't changed. It's what we call a static classification. Okay, so and if you're part of it, you can put that status on your label. If you didn't quite make it into the Cru Classé in the Médoc, they also have a tier which is called Cru Bourgeois. And again, this is sort of for those good quality producers that didn't quite make the Cru Classé status, but it enables new entrants. So this is something that actually is revised. It used to be every year you had to submit your wines, so it's a little bit more up to date in terms of representing the particular vintage. But they're just going to change that actually as of 2020. And every 5 years it'll be reviewed. So you submit your wines from the last few vintages, and if you're given approval, you can put the term Cru Bourgeois on the label. So it's if you see that on a label, it's a quality status. It's a good, people can feel confident in buying those wines, good quality wines coming from the Médoc. And then Cru Artisan is a small producer. So this is classification for small family-owned producers that do everything themselves. So in the vineyards, the marketing, the whole company as well. So you can see that on labels from the Médoc. In the Grave, they also followed suit in the 20th century, in the 1950s, and also used the Cru Classé. So again, if you see Cru Classé from Pessac-Lyonnais and the Grave, you can also know that that's a top quality producer coming from that region. So, these are terms that you can look for and give you some confidence in what you're purchasing. What's interesting about the Grave is it's not just for red wines like it is in the Médoc with your 1855 classification. So it can be for whites and reds. And the Grave do have some of the lovely dry white wines of Bordeaux that I'm a big fan of. Right, and then a little bit more complicated on the right bank. So in Saint-Emilion, it's a little bit different because it's linked to the appellation. Okay, so you have just normal Saint-Emilion. Then you have Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, appellation control. So you can see here, this is Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. But this then also has higher levels. So you then have Grand Cru Classé, which is a level above, Premier Grand Cru Classé B, and Premier Grand Cru Classé A. So there's this clear hierarchy. You can climb up the ladder. You've only got a few producers right at the top at Premier Grand Cru Classé A. But it's motivational. So every 10 years they review it, and you can go up or down or stay the same. It's basically a summary of that. It can get quite complex. But again, you see Grand Cru, but particularly Grand Cru Classé. So always look for the Classé, I think. If you're looking on the left bank and the right bank, that is where you start to get, that real degree of quality, and especially Premier Grand Cru Classé. And then Pomerol's just, the different regions like to have their own rules and regulations. And I like Pomerol because it's just a little bit more straightforward. There's no classification. So you'd see Pomerol on the label telling you it's from that particular area. You'd see the particular producer name, and that's it. You can make up your own mind, or, have a look at the prices to kind of work out who you think is the best quality. Okay, so just an insight. Obviously, there's quite a bit of detail. I haven't got time to go into everything, but it gives you an idea of, some of the hierarchies in the different places. All right, a little bit about the white wines, because as I said, this is an area that sometimes is a little bit overlooked. They do some great white wines in Bordeaux, and you've got everything from just, easy drinking. So if it says Bordeaux Blanc or Entre de Mer, these are usually just Sauvignon Blanc led blends, which are really fresh, fruity, youthful wines. So unoaked, they'll be fermented in stainless steel or concrete usually. Just really vibrant, fresh, fruity white wines. Um, Equally, the Grave and Pessac Lyonnais, they have a tendency to oak the white wines. And I love this style where you tend to get Sauvignon Blanc, but also blended with Semillon. It'll be matured in new French oak barrels, not always 100% new, but oak barrels. So it gives it this sort of toasty, lovely, smoky, toasty character. You are in the Pessac Lyonnais and Grave, so maybe more gravel soils as well, a little bit riper, lower yields. That gives these wines a little bit more body, and then they can bottle age as well, and you get these lovely nutty honey characters with time. So I think everyone perhaps thinks about Burgundy for white wines, and I'm a big Chardonnay fan as well, but I do love some of these white wines from Bordeaux just for different occasions, very just easy drinking fresh fruity wine for a hot summer's day or certain types of food. And then you've got these sort of richer, fuller oak styles as well. Perfect for bottle aging, perfect with other cuisine. So just to give you an idea there of this, quite a few appellations. Bordeaux Blanc, Entre de Mer, the most important. You can see they're making up the kind of bulk, but there are white wines produced in some of the others, like Bly and the Côte de Bordeaux as well. And then obviously I couldn't talk about Bordeaux without talking about the really famous sweet wines. And if you love Sauternes, Barsac, these are probably the most famous. But there's actually all these other appellations, again, that are often underrepresented and unknown and can be great value for money. And sweet wines in Bordeaux are considered, more than 45 grams per litre, often a lot more than that. A lot of Sauternes will have about 130 grams per litre of sugar, so, sweet white wines. And this is how they're made. So a little snapshot here of botrytis. This is my own little tubby thumb there holding this bunch of grapes. And you can see how it's shriveling up the grapes on the vine, not all at the same rate. Some still look fairly healthy, but this is coming from botrytis, and this will be at the end of the season once the grapes are ripe, and it affects the grapes and shrivels them, and that concentrates the sugar, but it also concentrates the aroma and flavor of these grapes. So you get this really intense, really ripe fruits, dried fruits, things like dried apricot, orange marmalade. And then, as if that wasn't enough, tendency, particularly in some of the communes, and so tend to have some wood aging and maturation as well. So to add secondary vanilla and spice flavors to the wines as well. But as I said, look outside, you've got Sauternes and Barsac, incredible. But there's also all these others that often people aren't, really aware of. Loupiac, Cadillac, some amazing sweet wine producers. And you don't have to just have sweet wine with dessert. It can work with savory things very well. There's all sorts of different recommendations for food and wine pairings on the Bordeaux website if you want to be more adventurous, or even some of the semi-sweet styles as well. So something with a touch of sweetness, really good for the summer when it's hot. Perhaps you just it's got a little bit of sweetness with something like a fruit pudding, like Bordeaux Blanc Mouille. So it's a sweet, but it's not as sweet. It's kind of semi-sweet style. Okay, and then I've wanted to finish off just talking a little bit about some of the things that are quite unique to Bordeaux and some of the things that are going on at the moment in the region. So the trade structure, which is obviously quite interesting because you've got such a huge region, so many different producers. There's always been a big presence of négociants, which are companies that will buy wines from the multitude of producers, sometimes age it and then sell it on to different markets, to different importers, distributors, etc. So they act as the kind of in-between between the producers and the markets. And that, although it's adding obviously another person onto the chain, it can be really beneficial because there's just so, Bordeaux is so huge, and it enables buyers to go to one place to get a whole range of wines as well. The La Place is the way of selling Bordeaux wine traditionally, which is where all these négociants platform and it's the marketplace for these wines. And these days, actually, you can have wines from outside of the Bordeaux selling through the Place, because you have this ready-made distribution network that will divide your allocations up and market your wines globally. So rather than the individual producer or chateau, this is Chateau Pichon Baron here, rather than, you know, them having to make their wine and divide it and sell it and market it, they can just sell it to the Place and Negociants, and they just send the wine off around all the corners of the world. So it's a really interesting system. I mention here just because we are in mid-swing of Bordeaux 2019 en primeur, which is the future sales. So literally people buying wine, it's still in the chateau, it's still aging in the barrel, but people are saying, right, I want a case of that when it's released, you know, next year, late next year. And just to give you an idea of the price, this was the current price of Chateau Lafite for a 6-pack on release a couple of days ago. So this is some of your substantial, obviously the first growth, the top ranking in your 1855 classification from Pauillac. And just to show you, obviously, this can be a small part of the Bordeaux market, but incredibly profitable and important in terms of turnover. So it's a, you know, it's an interesting way of selling the wines, or some of the wines, before release. But also just to reflect the current climate, obviously it's still a very pricey chateau. There are others that are not as expensive, but these are 15% less than 2018. Some wines are releasing at 25% or so, because obviously the current economic climate and coronavirus. So if you did want to invest some wine, you know, invest in wine, there are some deals to be had. 2019 was a good quality vintage, and the prices have come down to reflect the current climate. And then lastly, sorry, I won't go through all of this, but I just want to touch on some of the things that are going on in the region. There's so much to see and do. Tourism. If you haven't been to Bordeaux, go. As I said, you had the École du Vin, amazing tastings. There's so many wine tours, you know, packages that you can go on. The Cité du Vin that opened in 2016, this incredible wine museum that's it's now had over 1.5 million visitors since it opened. Huge, you know, learning space, amazing displays. Here, this is a picture from one of the vineyards I visited in the Entre-deux-Mers, and you can stay. This is like a little cabin in the vineyards, and really nicely done, that was made out of a wine vat, you know. So there's some amazing creative and inventive things going on in the region. I also wanted to note, as it's very on topic at the moment in the environment, and often people think, oh, Bordeaux can't be organic because it's wetter, but there are organic, there are lots of biodynamic producers, some high profile ones like Pontet Canet, for example. And there's a real, you know, the CIVB invests a lot of money into research and promoting it, and it's, you know, it's part of the region in appellation. So 65% of the vineyard now have some sort of environmental certification, and there's lots of different ones with different approaches, but all, you know, looking at improving ultimately the conditions and the environment. HVE is something that you might see on some Bordeaux labels. It's haute valeur environmental, excuse my terrible French, but basically high value, high environmental value. So this is a certification that does things on like crop protection, fertilization, so looking at the real health of your vineyard basically. And as another example, Saint-Emilion there, they to try and incentivize producers to, you know, really consider the environment and progress and be, you know, looking to always do better. By 2023, if anyone actually wants to use the AOC Saint-Emilion, which obviously you get more for your wines rather than just being Bordeaux, they have to have some sort of environmental certification. So this is really being inbuilt into the wine production and the industry in Bordeaux of sustainability and looking after the environment. 23 kilometers of hedges planted in 2018. So looking after different wildlife and biodiversity as well. Whites, roses and Cremants, something that has been growing. It's still at a small percentage of the whole, but things that they are offering different wine styles. You have got roses, you've got lovely sparkling wines, and whites as well. So you've really got the whole range. And this I mentioned a little bit earlier, that also they are adapting. Sometimes Bordeaux is seen as a very traditional region. It is. It has a long-standing heritage, and I love the history of the region and some of the traditional wine styles, but that doesn't mean that they don't adapt and innovate. And this is something that hopefully, if approved, they will be allowing some other grape varieties into Bordeaux and Bordeaux Superior to allow for climate change. So grape varieties that retain acidity, late ripening, because it has been proven that, the average vintage is getting warmer. So this will enable producers to adapt. So you've got things like Alvarinho, the Portuguese grape variety, Touriga Nacional, also Marcelin, which is Cabernet Sauvignon times Grenache. So, suited, later ripening, heat-resistant grape varieties. So looking towards the future as well. Packaging, I always throw that in there. Obviously, a lot of the wines are still traditional, but you can find Bordeaux now in all sorts, pouches, glasses ready to go, bag-in-box cans. They are being quite inventive as well. And also the Eno Bordeaux app, just if you're interested, you can get from the CIVB, and there's so much information on there as a learning tool as well. All right, sorry, I knew I would almost overrun. There's a lot of information. This is just to show you very briefly, there has been some consolidation in the region as well, because obviously it is a large area, so people are investing from outside, other producers are buying up different chateaus, so that you have overall the number of producers is falling, and the area that they own has gone up over the last few decades, to make use of sort of economies of scale as well. And then I just wanted to summarize, why do people love Bordeaux? Why do I love Bordeaux? As I've kind of commented on, the styles available, you've got everything from sparkling, dry whites, sweet whites, semi-sweet, rosés, deeper rosés, claret, reds of all different quality, prices. There's just really something for everyone, something for every different occasion. As I said, from just really affordable, everyday supermarket prices to top premium investment if you're in that sphere. Cuisine wines, especially the reds. I love Bordeaux and food. It's just so, it's so cuisine friendly, and you can have so many different matches and different foods to play with. The ageability, as I said, I love some of those tertiary mature flavor characteristics, and the fact that you can age for decades and you can open that really special bottle and taste it. The availability, because there is so much produced, you can find Bordeaux in a lot of different countries, a lot of different markets. It's not this sort of exclusive club that you can't find. So and you can find these good value producers. Look, in the Côte, look in these other areas as well. There's always lots of different things available. And visit the region. This is beautiful. This is one of the properties in Margaux. It's just, there's so much going on in the region. You've got the Arcachon Bay for oysters, not that far away. You can do boat trips down the Gironde. Amazing restaurants. Great history, some amazing buildings, and they've really done a lot of work along the Gironde and the river, and it's a stunning area to visit. So, visit. Just a few more of webinars that we have coming up over the next few weeks. So things, obviously you can find them all on our website. So please have a look at the tastings and events if you want to know anything more. And obviously there's all the school details should you need anything, my personal Instagram there if you want to get in touch. But yes, sorry if I slightly overran. I know there's so much to talk about, but hopefully you came across that there's so much to talk about. But I shall answer any of your questions now. If you want to just re-put them in the chat, please, so that I can have a look at them, I shall do that. Thank you for joining.